It started as an ordinary research mission, just another calm day out on the open sea. The crew of the research vessel Kaimaru had been working for weeks, studying deep-sea currents near Okinawa. The ocean was calm, the weather was perfect, and the gentle rhythm of the waves made the air feel peaceful. Nobody on board could have imagined that by the end of that week, their lives, and possibly the world's understanding of the ocean, would change forever. The Kaimaru wasn't a military ship or a fancy expedition vessel. It was an aging but reliable research boat, filled with scientists, engineers, and technicians. Their leader, Dr. Kenji Sato, was a quiet man in his late 50s, known for his calm voice and endless patience. He had spent his life studying the ocean, believing it still hid secrets no one had ever seen. That morning, as he sipped his coffee on deck, he watched the horizon and smiled. "The ocean is calm," he said softly, but never silent. Around mid-morning, one of the younger crew members, a radar operator named Aiko, called out from the control room. Her voice carried a hint of confusion. "Dr. Sato, can you come here for a second? There's something strange on the scanner." At first, nobody paid much attention. The ocean often played tricks on their instruments. But when Sato walked in and looked at the screen, his expression changed. A single massive shape had appeared on the radar, far too large to be a whale or a school of fish. Yet it moved slowly, deliberately, as if it were alive. "It's probably just terrain interference," one of the engineers said. "Maybe," Sato replied, narrowing his eyes. "But look at the motion. It's moving upstream against the current." That caught everyone's attention. Objects that large didn't usually move like that. The crew adjusted their equipment, thinking it might be a glitch, but the signal only grew clearer. The outline was unmistakable, a long, dense shape, almost like a human figure stretched across the sea floor. The crew began whispering among themselves. Someone joked nervously, "What is that, a giant robot?" The laughter was uneasy. Sato didn't laugh. He stood there watching the slow pulse on the screen, feeling a strange heaviness in his chest. He had studied sonar readings for 30 years. He had seen ships, submarines, whales, even deep-sea volcanic ridges, but nothing looked like this. Aiko turned to him. "It's shaped like a person," she said quietly. "Look at the head and shoulders." Sato didn't respond. He just kept staring. The object seemed to rise and sink like it was breathing. After a few minutes, the radar flickered. The signal vanished completely. "Gone," Aiko said. "Just disappeared." The room went silent for a moment, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engine. "Mark the coordinates," Sato said finally. "We'll go back and check again later." For the rest of the day, the crew tried to carry on as usual, collecting water samples and monitoring temperature readings. But nobody could shake off what they had seen. It was too strange. Every so often, someone would glance nervously at the ocean, half expecting something to rise from the water. That evening, as the sun dipped low, turning the sea golden, Sato stood alone on deck. The horizon stretched endlessly, peaceful and empty. Yet somewhere beneath that calm surface, he knew something enormous had moved, something that shouldn't exist. He didn't know if it was natural or man-made, but he was certain of one thing. It was watching them just as they had spotted it. When night fell, the crew gathered in the control room to review the radar data. The recordings clearly showed a moving form that had been present for nearly 20 minutes before disappearing. The computer identified the density as metallic, not biological. But there was no known submersible or vessel of that size in the area. No military drills, no cargo routes, nothing. Sato frowned. "Maybe a sunken ship caught in a current?" he offered, though his tone lacked conviction. The engineer shook his head. "Impossible. The signal moved horizontally for almost 2 kilometers. A wreck can't do that." Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what that meant. Whatever it was alive or controlled by something intelligent. Later that night, as most of the crew tried to sleep, the ocean grew eerily quiet. The wind stopped. The waves flattened. It was as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Aiko, unable to sleep, went back to the control room. Out of curiosity, she turned the radar back on. At first, nothing appeared. Then faintly, a familiar blip appeared on the screen, right beneath their vessel. Her heart began to race. The object was back and closer than before. She called Sato, her voice trembling. "It's under us, right now." Within seconds, the small control room filled with footsteps and murmurs. The radar showed a shape larger than the ship itself directly below. Everyone stared at the screen, frozen. Then slowly the signal began to rise toward the surface. The crew rushed to the deck, their flashlights cutting across the dark sea. For a long moment there was nothing, just black water stretching endlessly in every direction. Then a sound, a deep low rumble, vibrated through the hull. The lights flickered. Someone gasped. The water near the ship began to bubble and churn as if something massive was pushing upward from the depths, and then they saw it. Just a few meters away, the surface broke open. Something enormous rose from the dark water, a shadow, humanoid in shape, its surface reflecting faint light like metal. It wasn't clear or sharp. It looked half liquid, half solid, as if made of both machine and sea. Its eyes, or what seemed like eyes, glowed faintly with a bluish light. No one spoke. No one even breathed. The ocean around the figure rippled silently as it towered above the waterline, motionless, watching the ship. The crew's flashlights flickered again, and for a brief second, they could see the outline clearly, a human form, but far too large, easily 50 meters tall, its chest plated like armor, its limbs covered in what looked like sea growth and corrosion. Aiko whispered, "It's alive." Sato didn't answer. He was too stunned to move. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure sank back beneath the water without a sound. The ocean went still again. The radar signal disappeared. The sky above was silent, calm, and almost too normal, as if nothing had happened. Nobody slept that night. By morning, the ship's instruments were acting strangely. The radar refused to start, and the sonar emitted static. Every attempt to recalibrate failed. It was as if an invisible field surrounded them, blocking communication and navigation. The captain suggested returning to port, but Sato wanted to stay one more day. "We can't just leave," he said. "We saw something the world has never seen." The others hesitated. Fear was written on their faces. They weren't trained for this. They were researchers, not soldiers. But Sato's calm authority convinced them to stay just a little longer. That afternoon, as the sun began to set again, the radar briefly flickered to life on its own. A single short signal appeared, not beneath them this time, but several kilometers away, moving steadily north. Then another appeared beside it. Then a third. The signals were moving in formation. Sato's throat went dry. "There's more than one," he whispered. No one spoke for a long time. The air in the control room felt heavy. They watched the dots move together, like ships in a fleet, before finally fading one by one into the deep. As darkness fell for the second night, Sato wrote a note in his logbook. "The ocean is not empty. We are being watched. Whatever these things are, they move with purpose, and they know we have seen them." He closed the book, set down his pen, and stared out the small window. The sea outside looked calm and peaceful again, but deep down he felt a strange certainty. Something ancient, something beyond their understanding had awakened beneath the surface, and it was moving closer. The next morning came with an uneasy silence. The sea looked calm, painted in soft shades of blue and silver, but nobody on the Kaimaru could relax. The crew moved slower than usual, their faces pale from lack of sleep. Everyone was still thinking about what they saw last night. Some tried to convince themselves it had been a trick of light or a technical glitch, but deep inside, none of them truly believed that. They knew they had witnessed something real, something that defied explanation. Dr. Sato stood quietly by the railing, staring out at the endless water. The sun's reflection shimmered across the waves, blindingly bright. Normally, he loved mornings like this, peaceful and full of promise, but now that same calmness felt strange, almost too perfect, like the ocean was pretending. He couldn't stop thinking about the shape that had risen from the depths, that towering human form that had watched them in silence. It hadn't attacked or spoken. It had just looked, and somehow that made it even more unsettling. Around mid-morning, the radar finally started working again, though the screen still flickered now and then. Aiko sat at her station, eyes glued to the display. She didn't want to see the shape again, but at the same time, she couldn't look away. The ocean was wide open. There was no sign of anything unusual. For hours, the readings remained clear. The crew started to relax little by little. Some even began to talk and laugh again, trying to bring back a sense of normal life on board. Lunch was served in the small galley, and for a while the ship felt alive again. But beneath that small burst of calm, Everyone knew it wouldn't last. There was something unfinished about the encounter, something waiting. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather in the distance. The sea darkened. The wind grew stronger, bringing with it a salty mist. Sato went back to the control room to review the previous night's data again. The radar footage, the sonar patterns, the strange electromagnetic readings, they all pointed to the same conclusion. The object they had seen was not a natural formation. It was metallic, massive, and moving with purpose. He stared at the graphs for a long time, lost in thought. Suddenly, a soft sound broke the quiet, a faint beep. Aiko turned toward the radar screen. "Dr. Sato," she said softly. "It's back." Everyone in the room froze. The familiar shape had returned, this time farther away but approaching steadily. Sato leaned closer to the monitor. The object was moving faster now, cutting through the water like something that knew exactly where it was going. He swallowed hard. "Distance?" he asked. "About 12 kilometers in closing," Aiko replied. Her voice was shaking. The engineer beside her ran a quick check to confirm. "Same density reading as before," he said. "It's metal. And it's moving against the current again." Sato took a deep breath. "Keep the radar on it. Record everything." Outside, the wind howled louder. The sea began to roll with tall, heavy waves. The ship's hull groaned as it rocked in the swell. The crew rushed to secure loose equipment while the captain held the vessel steady. Nobody spoke, but everyone felt it. The sense that something vast and powerful was moving beneath them again. As night began to fall, the sky turned a deep gray. The rain started, light at first, then stronger. The sound of raindrops hitting the deck mixed with the hum of the engines and the constant beep of the radar. "Still coming closer," Aiko whispered. Sato looked out through the window, though he could see nothing but darkness and mist. "Can we get a visual on the surface?" he asked. "Trying," the captain replied, adjusting the floodlights. The moment the lights hit the water, everyone saw it. The waves were moving differently now, swirling as if something huge was pushing beneath them. The radar suddenly showed not one but two shapes. Aiko gasped. "There's another one!" The two signals moved in perfect rhythm, side by side, like synchronized swimmers. Then a third one appeared. 3 giant forms closing in from different directions. The sound of the radar echoed through the small room, each beep pounding in their ears. And then, without warning, the lights flickered again and went out. The ship was plunged into darkness. Only the dim emergency lights glowed faintly red. Outside, the storm raged and the ocean roared. Someone shouted from the deck, "There's something out there! Turn the lights back on!" The crew scrambled to restart the generator. Sparks flew from one of the panels, but finally the floodlights blinked on again. For a brief second, everyone froze. The sea ahead of them wasn't empty anymore. There, not far from the ship, something massive floated on the surface. It looked metallic, covered in what seemed like dark plates or armor. Water streamed off its sides as it moved, slow and deliberate. It was shaped like a person, shoulders, arms, even a head, but far larger than anything human. The body glowed faintly beneath the waves, lines of blue light tracing across its surface like veins of energy. A sound rolled through the air, not loud, but deep enough to vibrate in their chests. It was low and rhythmic, almost like breathing. The creature, or machine, turned slightly, and for the first time they saw its face. It wasn't clear or sharp. It was smooth and expressionless, like a statue carved from liquid metal. 2 small glowing eyes looked directly at the ship. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The ocean itself seemed to go quiet, waiting. Iko's hands trembled as she whispered, "It's watching us." Sato could feel his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He tried to think of something to say, something scientific or rational, but words refused to come. Every instinct told him that whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a random creature. It had intelligence, or at least awareness. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it began to sink again. The glow faded as it slipped beneath the waves until the ocean was dark once more. The radar screen went blank. For a few seconds, everyone just stared in silence, too stunned to move. Then the captain shouted, "Back away! Move us out of here!" The engines roared to life, and the ship turned sharply. The crew worked fast, pulling away from the spot as the waves crashed around them. But just as they started to distance themselves, the radar picked up another blip, smaller this time, following behind them like a shadow. Aiko's voice broke the silence. "It's following us," Sato leaned over the radar, eyes wide. The smaller signal stayed directly behind their path, mirroring every turn they made. It didn't seem aggressive, but it also didn't stop. It was observing them, matching their movements like it was studying the ship. "This is not random," Sato said quietly. "It's responding to us." Hours passed and the storm began to fade. The smaller signal finally stopped following and disappeared from the radar. Everyone let out a collective sigh of relief, though the tension didn't leave the air. They had all seen it. There was no longer any doubt. The next morning, the ocean was calm again, almost unnaturally so. The crew looked exhausted, their eyes hollow from lack of sleep and fear. The captain radioed the Japanese Coast Guard, reporting an unidentified underwater object of massive size. The response came hours later. There were no military exercises or submarines in the area, and no known vessel matched their description. Sato sent the radar data and recordings to the authorities, hoping someone could explain it. But the reply he received was short and dismissive. Likely an equipment malfunction, they said. Perhaps sonar distortion from volcanic activity. They didn't believe him, or maybe they didn't want to believe him. The crew knew what they had seen, and deep down, Sato suspected that their presence or perhaps their equipment had somehow drawn the thing to them. He kept thinking about those low-frequency sonar pings they had been testing earlier in the week. What if those sounds had reached something that wasn't supposed to be disturbed? That night, as the others slept, Sato stood on deck again, staring at the sea. The moonlight shimmered across the waves. Everything looked calm, quiet, almost beautiful. But the memory of that glowing, human-shaped form wouldn't leave his mind. He thought about how it had turned its head, how it had seemed to notice them. He whispered softly, "We didn't just find it. We called it." Far out in the distance, something rippled across the surface, just for a second, a faint shimmer, like a reflection of light where there shouldn't have been one. Then it vanished. The sea went still once more. Sato stayed there for a long time, listening to the slow heartbeat of the waves, feeling the strange weight of what they had discovered. He didn't know if it was alive, built, or something beyond both. But one thing was clear: whatever it was, it had seen them. And now it knew they were there. The next few days on the Kaimaru were quiet, but it was not the kind of quiet anyone enjoyed. The air felt heavy, almost as if the ocean itself was hiding a secret it didn't want to share. Everyone was still thinking about the thing they had seen. The enormous human-shaped figure that had risen from the water and then vanished without a trace. Most of the crew wanted to forget it and move on. They told themselves it was just some strange deep-sea reflection or an unknown submarine. But Dr. Sato couldn't let it go. Every time he looked out at the calm waves, he felt as if something was looking back. He couldn't explain why, but deep down, he was certain that the event wasn't over yet. The scientists on board went back to their work, collecting samples and data from the sea floor, but nothing felt normal anymore. The instruments that had worked fine for years were suddenly acting strange. The sonar picked up sounds that came and went like whispers, short bursts of rhythmic pulses that didn't match any known marine life or machinery. One evening, as the sky turned orange with sunset, Aiko called out from the radar room again. "Dr. Sato, you should see this," she said, her voice quiet but tense. He hurried in, expecting another glitch. But what he saw made his stomach tighten. The radar wasn't showing a shape this time. Instead, there was a pattern, a repeated sequence of small signals forming short bursts, pausing, then repeating again. "It's like code," she said. "It's not random." Sato stared at the data. The signals were evenly spaced, precise and rhythmic, too clean to be natural. He leaned closer and whispered, "It looks like they're trying to communicate." The words hung in the air. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the engineer behind them frowned. "Communicate with what?" "There's no transmitter out there." Sato didn't answer right away. He remembered the sonar test they had conducted days before. An experimental deep-frequency signal meant to study how sound travels through ocean layers. The frequency had been low and powerful, capable of traveling miles underwater. "What if," he said slowly, "our sonar reached something it wasn't supposed to?" The room went silent. Everyone knew the ocean was deep and mysterious, but the idea that they might have woken something up was almost too much to believe. That night, the crew decided to shut down the sonar completely. They didn't want to risk sending any more signals. But even after they turned it off, the strange patterns continued to appear. faint but steady, like replies coming from the deep. By the next morning, the signal had grown stronger. It was no longer a simple rhythm. It was layered like multiple tones overlapping. When they played it through the speaker, it didn't sound mechanical. It sounded alive. The crew gathered around, listening in uneasy silence as the deep humming filled the room. "It almost sounds like voices," someone whispered. Aiko turned pale. "They're answering us," she said softly. The captain wanted to leave immediately. He argued that the research wasn't worth the risk. But Sato wasn't ready to give up. He felt a strange sense of responsibility. Whatever this was, they had started it, and he couldn't just turn away. He decided to document everything. Each signal was recorded, time-stamped, and saved to the ship's main computer. Sato stayed up all night analyzing the sound waves, trying to make sense of them. As he studied the recordings, he noticed something chilling. The pattern of the frequencies matched the exact tone sequence of their original sonar test. They weren't random signals. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was mimicking them. The next day, the weather began to change. The ocean grew darker and thick fog rolled in from the east. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The Kaimaru slowed its engines, drifting carefully through the mist. The crew stayed quiet, listening to the low hum of the sea. Then it happened again. The radar started flashing. This time, not one, but many signals appeared. Dozens of shapes moving in formation beneath the ship. Each one large, metallic, and perfectly aligned. Aiko's hands shook as she tried to focus the display. "It's a whole group," she whispered. "They're moving together." The captain's voice was tense. "Can we identify them?" Sato leaned closer, studying the readings. "No known vessels in this area. No transponders. They're not ships." The signals were moving toward them, slowly but steadily. It looked like a fleet, an underwater convoy. But what frightened the crew most wasn't their size. It was how organized they were. The formations were precise, symmetrical, as if directed by intelligence. Sato recorded the data and radioed the mainland again, this time sending both radar and audio evidence. Hours later, a short reply came through, barely audible through static. The authorities thanked him for the information, but warned that deep-sea signals were often distorted and unreliable. They promised to investigate, but Sato could tell from their tone they didn't take it seriously. That night, as the ship drifted quietly through the fog, the crew gathered on deck. The sea was smooth like glass, and the only sound was the soft hum of the engine. The stars were hidden and the air felt unnaturally still. Then, out of nowhere, the water below began to glow faintly, a soft blue shimmer spreading across the waves. It wasn't bright, but enough to make everyone stop and stare. The glow pulsed gently in the same rhythm as the signals they had been receiving. Aiko whispered, "It's the same pattern." The entire ocean around them seemed to be breathing light, flickering like the heartbeat of something enormous below. Sato's pulse raced. He realized this was no coincidence. The signals, the formations, the glow, it was all connected. Suddenly, the radio crackled with static. A low humming sound came through the speaker, rising and falling in a strange pattern. Then, for just a split second, a human-like tone came through, something that almost sounded like words, but in no language they recognized. The sound was deep, haunting, and powerful. It made the metal walls of the ship vibrate. Everyone froze. The captain turned off the radio immediately, but the sound continued, now coming from the ocean itself. The crew rushed to the railing. The glowing water below began to swirl, forming slow, circular motions as if something huge was turning beneath the surface. The air smelled of salt and electricity. Then, just like before, the sea went completely still. The light faded. The sound stopped. And the radar went blank again. No one moved for several minutes. They all stood there, staring at the black water, each of them trying to understand what had just happened. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't a malfunction. It was real, and it was intelligent. Later that night, Sato sat alone in the control room, replaying the recordings. The signals were unmistakably patterned. He slowed down the audio, breaking it into smaller parts, and realized something that sent chills down his spine. The sequence wasn't just random. It was a mirror of their own sonar pings, but rearranged slightly like an echo learning to talk. He leaned back in his chair, whispering to himself, "They're copying us. They're trying to understand." He felt both terrified and fascinated. If this was true, it meant the ocean wasn't just hiding a creature. It was hiding a form of intelligence that could learn and adapt. The next morning, the fog began to lift, but the mood on the ship remained heavy. The crew moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. Nobody wanted to talk about what they had heard or seen. But as the sun rose, something strange happened again. The radar flickered one last time and displayed a short burst of repeating signals. It was the same pattern from before. But this time, at the end of the sequence, there was an extra note, a single deep tone that hadn't been there before. It was like a response. Aiko turned to Sato. "They're sending us something new." Sato stared at the signal, his mind racing. "No," he said softly. "They're telling us they understand." The realization hit him hard. Whatever was under the sea wasn't just repeating sounds. It was learning from them. Each ping, each echo was becoming more complex, more deliberate. He looked out the window at the wide, empty ocean. It was hard to believe that beneath that peaceful surface something was alive, something intelligent and powerful. And now it knew how to talk back. That night, Sato made a final entry in his research log. "Our signals reached them. They learned from us." The ocean answered. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever they had discovered was no longer sleeping. It was awake, listening and waiting, and this time it was their turn to reply. The ocean looked calm again, but everyone on the Kaimaru knew that calm didn't mean safety. After the strange signals, after hearing those haunting tones echo from the deep, no one could rest easy anymore. Every small noise made them turn their heads. Every wave looked suspicious. It was as if the entire sea had turned into something alive, something that was watching them back. Dr. Sato sat alone in the control room early that morning, staring at the screen that now showed nothing but a flat, empty radar line. The deep sound patterns had stopped completely overnight, almost like the ocean had fallen silent again. But he didn't feel relieved. He felt uneasy. It wasn't silence when he was waiting. The rest of the crew wanted to go home. The captain had already said more than once that the ship should return to port immediately. But Sato was hesitant. His scientific curiosity was too strong. He felt that if they left now, they might never get another chance to understand what they had found. He tried to convince himself that maybe it was just a rare natural phenomenon. Maybe the signals came from an unknown deep-sea creature. Maybe the giant figure they saw was some optical illusion. But when he looked at the data again, the perfect patterns, the repeating rhythm, logic told him otherwise. Whatever it wasn't nature. It was intelligent. Later that morning, the ship's satellite connection came back. Sato finally managed to send all the recordings, radar data, and audio samples to Tokyo. He wrote a long report explaining everything that had happened, from the first sighting to the strange signals that mimicked their sonar. He ended it with one urgent line. Recommend immediate deep-sea monitoring at coordinates 24.13 degree or N, 2568 Possible contact with unknown marine intelligence. He sent it and waited. Hours passed, but there was no reply. When the response finally came late that evening, it was short and formal. "We have reviewed your report. Cause likely to be instrument malfunction or sonar interference. End of investigation." Sato read the message twice, unable to believe it. They didn't believe him. Or worse, they didn't want to believe him. He showed the message to the captain and the crew. Some looked angry. Others just shook their heads. One of the engineers muttered, "They think we're making this up." The captain sighed. "Maybe that's for the best. If we tell people we saw a human-shaped thing rise out of the sea, they'll think we've lost our minds." But Sato couldn't let it go. He had evidence. The radar logs, the recordings, the light patterns, good everything. Yet now it seemed like no one cared. He felt isolated, standing on the deck under the open sky, listening to the endless sound of waves hitting the hull. The ocean stretched out for miles, silent and mysterious. He whispered to himself, "They're out there. I know they are." Despite the official order to stop using sonar, Sato secretly reactivated the system late that night. He set it to a passive mode, meaning it wouldn't send signals, only listen. He wanted to see if the strange frequencies would appear again. For hours he sat in the dim glow of the monitor, staring at the slowly moving lines. Nothing. The ocean was quiet. Just when he began to think it was truly over, a faint pattern appeared, barely noticeable at first. Then another, slow, deliberate pulses spaced evenly apart. He leaned closer. The pattern was familiar. It was the same one from before, the same rhythm they had heard days earlier. His heart began to pound. "They're back," he whispered. He hit record immediately, capturing the sound. The signal was faint but steady. The frequency wasn't random. It was the same as before, but slightly altered. It was like a version 2, as if whoever was sending it had learned from the earlier communication. Sato didn't wake the crew. He just sat there, alone, listening to the soft hum echoing through the speakers. It sounded almost peaceful, deep, slow, and oddly calming, like a song from the bottom of the world. When he finally looked at the clock, it was past 3 a.m. The signal had stopped again. He saved the data carefully, labeling it with the date and time. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he was sure of one thing: the communication hadn't ended. The next morning, he showed the new data to Aiko. She listened carefully, her face pale. "They're answering again," she said softly. "Why didn't you wake us?" "I wanted to be sure," Sato replied. "It's not just a repeat. The signal is more structured now. It's organized." Aiko frowned. "Do you think they're trying to talk?" Sato nodded slowly. "Or warn us." That word hung in the air. Warn. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. The idea that something beneath the ocean might be sending them a warning was too strange to process. Later that day, the sea began to change again. The wind picked up slightly and the waves grew restless. The sky was clear, but the air felt different, thicker, heavier, almost electric. The crew noticed it too. The captain came to Sato and said, "Something's coming. I can feel it. We need to go back." But before they could decide, the instruments started to glitch again. The radar flickered. The navigation systems froze. The communication radio went silent. "Not again," Aiko said, tapping the controls. Sato tried to restart the systems, but nothing responded. It was the same pattern as before, just like the last time the human battleship appeared. The captain ordered the crew to shut down the engines and let the ship drift until they could regain control. For almost half an hour, they floated aimlessly in the middle of the open sea, surrounded by silence. Then a faint vibration passed through the ship's hull. It wasn't violent, more like a deep tremor coming from below. The water around the vessel rippled gently. The crew rushed to the deck, looking over the side. At first, there was nothing. Just the dark, endless sea. But then, in the distance, a soft glow appeared beneath the waves. Faint at first, then brighter. It was moving toward them. Aiko's voice shook. "It's them." The glowing shape approached slowly, almost gracefully, like a giant shadow sliding under the surface. It didn't come too close this time. It stayed several hundred meters away, circling them quietly. The glow shimmered beneath the water, spreading outward like light passing through glass. Sato watched in silence. There was no aggression, no movement that suggested danger. It almost felt like a message, like the thing below wanted them to see it but not fear it. After a few minutes, the glow began to fade. The shape sank deeper, disappearing into the blackness once again. The radar flickered back to life. The system started working again as if nothing had happened. The ship's engine restarted on its own. Everything returned to normal, at least on the surface. The crew stood there, speechless. No one dared to speak until finally the captain said quietly, "That was a warning. They're telling us to leave." Sato didn't argue. He finally agreed it was time to return. Whatever they had discovered, it was far beyond their understanding. But as the Kaimaru turned around and began its journey back to shore, Sato couldn't help looking back at the sea. He couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just stumbled upon something unknown. They had interfered with something ancient, something that didn't want to be disturbed. That night, as the ship sailed slowly under the stars, Sato opened his logbook again and wrote, "They responded again tonight. The signal was stronger, more deliberate. We were told to stop, not in words but in presence. I believe they're not hostile. But they want to be left alone. The sea has its guardians and we've crossed their path." He closed the book and set it aside, but his thoughts kept spinning. If these beings could communicate, what else could they do? Were they protecting something beneath the sea, or were they preparing for something that humans couldn't yet understand? The next morning, as the coastline finally appeared on the horizon, the crew felt relief for the first time in days. But just before they reached port, the radio crackled again. One final burst of static, followed by a faint, rhythmic tone. Sato froze. It was the same signal, the same deep frequency, only this time it wasn't coming from the ocean. It was coming from their own ship. He looked at Aiko, who stared back in disbelief. "It's repeating from our system," she whispered. "It's coming from inside." Sato didn't know how to respond. He only stood there, feeling the chill run down his spine as the deep, steady hum filled the room. It was slow, patient, almost like a heartbeat. And in that moment he realized something terrifying. The communication wasn't one way anymore. Whatever they had awakened in the deep had left a trace, and it had followed them home. The signal wouldn't stop. That same deep rhythmic hum kept echoing softly inside the control room, vibrating through the panels and speakers. Everyone on the ship stood frozen, staring at the screen as if it had come alive. The captain ordered the system to be shut down, but even after they cut the power, the sound was still there, faint but steady, like a pulse buried inside the metal of the ship. Dr. Sato leaned closer to one of the consoles. The lights were off, yet he could still feel a slight vibration under his hand. It was as if the ship itself was breathing. "It's not from the ocean," he whispered. "It's coming from inside." No one moved for a moment. The engineer who had worked with Sato on the sonar systems ran a quick test to trace the signal. The results made his face pale. "It's coming from the auxiliary memory drive," he said quietly. "The same one that stored all our sonar recordings." Sato stared at him. "That means—" "Yes," the engineer said, interrupting him. "It means the sound is in the data. Somehow the signal copied itself into the system." It didn't make sense. Sound couldn't copy itself. It wasn't a virus, not a digital file. It was a frequency. Yet somehow the pattern from the ocean had embedded itself into their ship's electronics. The captain's patience had run out. "I don't care what it is. I want it gone. Delete everything. Every recording, every log, every trace of that signal." Sato hesitated. "But that's our only proof." "Proof of what?" The captain cut him off. "That we brought something back with us? That the sea is talking to us? No one will believe that. Delete it." After a long silence, Sato finally nodded. He didn't agree, but he understood. The safety of the crew came first. He began the deletion process himself. One by one, the data files disappeared from the system. The sound slowly faded as the files vanished, like it was finally letting go. When it was over, the ship went silent again. The tension in the air eased a little. Some of the crew even smiled for the first time in days. They thought it was finally finished. By late afternoon, the Kaimaru reached the harbor. The crew couldn't wait to step on land again. They looked exhausted, their faces pale from lack of sleep. Sato stayed behind a bit longer, making sure all instruments were properly shut down. When he finally walked off the ship, he looked back one last time. The sun was setting over the water, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. The ocean looked peaceful again, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. But deep inside, Sato couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Something about the silence felt unnatural, too perfect. Over the next few days, the crew returned to their normal lives. Some went home to their families, some stayed near the docks, repairing the ship. The captain filed his final report, calling the whole event an instrument malfunction. It was easier to explain it that way. Sato, however, couldn't rest. He still had a few copies of the sonar readings saved on a portable drive, one he had kept hidden before the deletion. He didn't want to lose all the data. He told himself it was only for research, but deep down he also knew he needed answers. Back at his small apartment, he plugged the drive into his laptop and opened the files. The sound patterns were still there, perfectly intact. He played one of the recordings just to hear it again. The low hum filled the room, deep, smooth, and strangely rhythmic. He closed his eyes and listened. The sound felt almost alive, as if it was trying to communicate something through vibration alone. But after a few seconds, something odd happened. The laptop screen flickered. For a brief moment, the audio visualization shifted into strange shapes, forming what looked like symbols. Then it went back to normal. Sato leaned back, stunned. He replayed the file. The same thing happened again, shapes flashing for a second before disappearing. They weren't random. They looked almost like letters. He froze. Could it be that the sound wasn't just a signal but a code? He spent the whole night analyzing the patterns. converting frequencies into numerical data, trying to decode whatever message might be hidden inside. As he worked, the same thought kept repeating in his mind: they left something behind on purpose. The next morning, he went to the Ocean Research Center to meet Aiko. She had been part of the same expedition and was the only one who still believed something extraordinary had happened out there. When Sato told her about the sound reappearing inside the ship, she wasn't surprised. "I had a feeling it wasn't finished," she said quietly. "Sometimes I still hear it, in my head late at night, like an echo that won't fade." Sato nodded slowly. He understood exactly what she meant. It was as if the ocean itself had marked them. They decided to run one final analysis using the research center's powerful computers. They uploaded the sound file and watched as lines and patterns filled the screen. After a few minutes, the system started recognizing repeating shapes, almost like waves forming letters in a language no one had seen before. "It's not random," Aiko whispered. "It's some kind of structure, maybe even a message." The more they looked, the clearer it became. The symbols seemed to repeat in a pattern, almost like coordinates, but not exactly. It was as if something deep below the sea was giving them a direction. Aiko turned to Sato. "Should we go back?" Sato hesitated. Every part of him wanted to say no. But curiosity, that same force that drove him into the ocean in the first place, wouldn't let him stop. "If this is really a message," he said finally, "we can't just ignore it." The next few days were a blur. They tried to get permission for another expedition, but their previous report had already been dismissed. No one wanted to fund another trip, so they decided to go on their own, just the two of them with a small rented research vessel and basic sonar equipment. When they reached the same coordinates again, the sea was completely calm. The sun reflected off the water like glass. It almost looked too quiet, as if the ocean was waiting for them. They activated the sonar and began scanning the area. At first nothing appeared, just the usual echoes of deep water and distant movement. But after an hour, something strange showed up on the radar. A faint shape far below the surface. Aiko adjusted the controls to focus. "There," she said softly. "Look at that." The shape was massive. Larger than any submarine, larger even than a small island. It wasn't moving. It was resting quietly on the ocean floor. Sato's heart raced. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the thing we saw. The human-shaped battleship." They lowered an underwater camera drone. As it descended into the deep, the light faded, swallowed by the darkness below. The screen flickered as the drone went deeper and deeper until suddenly something appeared. A smooth metallic surface covered in strange patterns. It didn't look man-made. The material was seamless, glowing faintly with light from within. It was as if it wasn't built, it had grown. Aiko stared at the screen, speechless. "It's real," she said finally. "It's all real." Before they could react, the drone's signal began to distort. The camera flickered, then froze completely. A deep vibration rolled through the water, shaking the ship slightly. The sound was the same as before, that familiar low hum, now louder and stronger. The ocean around them began to shimmer faintly. Tiny ripples of light spread across the surface, glowing softly in rhythm with the sound. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like the sea itself was alive. Sato gripped the railing tightly. "It's responding to us again." The hum grew deeper, vibrating through their bones. And then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light faded. The sea went still once more. The silence afterward was almost unbearable. Aiko looked at Sato. "What do you think it wants from us?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the water, deep in thought. Finally, he said, "I don't think it wants anything. I think it's showing us that it's here, and that it's been here for a long time. They didn't dare go any closer." They marked the coordinates again and turned the boat around. As they left, the water behind them shimmered once more in a soft, faint glow that followed their vessel for several minutes before fading into the horizon. When they finally reached shore that night, both of them were silent. There were no words for what they had just witnessed. But Sato couldn't help thinking, if that massive structure was resting at the bottom of the ocean, motionless yet alive, what was it waiting for? And why now? After all this time, had it chosen to reveal itself to them? That night, as Sato sat in his room, he opened his logbook again and wrote the same words he had written before, but this time with a small addition. They are not gone. They never were. The human-shaped battleship sleeps beneath the ocean, and now I think it's beginning to wake up. He closed the book slowly and looked out at the dark horizon. The sea was quiet, but somewhere deep beneath it something ancient was stirring, and humanity had just reminded it that they still existed. Days passed after Sato and Aiko returned from their second voyage. The sea looked calm again, and life in the port town slowly went back to normal. But both of them knew nothing was truly normal anymore. They had seen something impossible, a massive human-shaped structure sleeping beneath the waves, glowing faintly like a living being. Sato couldn't stop thinking about it. He had notebooks full of sketches, coordinates, sound readings, and theories. But no matter how much he studied the data, one question remained. What exactly was it? It wasn't a ship, at least not one made by humans. It didn't move like a submarine or look like any known machine. It felt old, ancient, and yet strangely alive. The more he thought about it, the more he wondered if it was something that had been here long before humans even existed. At night, he often walked to the shore, listening to the sound of the waves hitting the rocks. Sometimes when the wind was still and the sea quiet, he could almost hear that same deep hum again, faint, far away, but unmistakable. It was like the ocean was breathing softly, reminding him that it hadn't forgotten. Aiko visited him one evening. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept properly in days. "It's happening again," she said quietly. "The sounds. They started in the harbor this morning. Fishermen heard it too." Sato looked at her in disbelief. "You mean the same frequency?" She nodded. "They said their radios and navigation devices picked up low vibrations. It's spreading." They both went to the harbor that night to listen for themselves. The water looked calm, but when they stood near the docks, they felt a strange vibration under their feet, deep and rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath the ground. The fishermen had gathered in small groups, whispering nervously. One of them said his boat's compass had started spinning wildly just an hour before. Another said the sonar showed massive shapes moving deep below. Sato knew it wasn't imagination. Whatever was beneath the sea was no longer sleeping. It was waking up. The next morning, the news channels started talking about strange underwater disturbances across the region. Ships reported losing power for short periods. Submarines detected sudden changes in pressure deep below. Scientists called it unusual tectonic activity, but Sato and Aiko knew better. They returned to the research center to check the global sonar network, a system used to monitor ocean sounds around the world. What they found left them speechless. The same frequency they had recorded before was now appearing in several distant locations, not just near their original site, but thousands of miles apart. "It's spreading," Aiko said, her voice trembling. "There's more than one." Sato stared at the screen. Each signal blinked slowly like a heartbeat moving from one ocean to another. The pattern was clear. Something vast and connected was waking up under the sea. Not just one entity, but many. They didn't know what to do. No one would believe them. And even if someone did, how could anyone stop something that lived miles beneath the surface? It wasn't attacking, at least not yet. It was just awakening. That night, Sato sat in his apartment staring at his notebook. He had spent his life studying the sea, believing it was the last unexplored part of Earth. But now, he realized, maybe it had always been alive in ways humans never understood. Maybe the ocean didn't just hide life. Maybe it was life in a form beyond comprehension. A soft knock on his door broke his thoughts. It was Aiko again, holding a small radio device in her hand. "Listen," she said. She turned the dial slowly, and the same deep tone filled the air. Slow, powerful, and steady. But this time it was clearer, almost melodic, as if something was forming a pattern. Sato listened carefully. "It's changing," he whispered. "It's communicating again." The pattern was different from before, more rhythmic, almost like a sequence of words. Sato began to write down the intervals and translate them into numbers, then letters. The code spelled a simple, haunting message. "Do not fear." Aiko stared at the paper in silence. "Do not fear? It's trying to calm us?" Sato looked thoughtful. "Maybe it knows we're afraid. Maybe it's been watching us all along." They listened for a while longer. The sound grew softer until it faded completely. For the first time in weeks, they felt a strange sense of peace instead of fear. The following days brought even stranger changes. Ocean currents began to shift. Water temperatures rose slightly in some areas and dropped in others. Whales and dolphins appeared near coastlines, behaving unusually calm, almost as if they were responding to something humans couldn't hear. Sato spent hours watching the live satellite feed of the sea. The glow that had once appeared near their expedition site was now visible from above, faint but unmistakable, a circle of light deep below, expanding slowly. It wasn't destructive. It looked almost like a signal, a silent beacon beneath the waves. Soon the world began to take notice. Research ships from other countries went to investigate, but most of them reported strange power failures near the coordinates. No one could get close enough to see what was happening. Governments stayed quiet, calling it classified research, but rumors spread quickly about something moving in the deep, something too large to be human-made. One evening, Sato received an encrypted message from a scientist he had once worked with abroad. The message was short. "We recorded the same signal here. Pacific, Atlantic, Indian. It's global now. They are awakening." Sato stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a mix of fear and wonder. Humanity had always looked at the stars, searching for life beyond Earth, never realizing something greater might have been beneath them all along. That night, he returned to the shore once again. The sea was completely still. The moonlight shimmered across the surface, turning it silver and calm. Heiko joined him quietly. They didn't speak. They just stood there watching the horizon. Then it happened. Far in the distance, the water began to glow softly, the same pale blue light they had seen before. But this time it wasn't just one spot. Multiple faint lights appeared across the horizon, rising and falling gently like slow breaths. They weren't violent or chaotic. They moved with grace in perfect rhythm, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Aiko whispered, "They're everywhere." Sato nodded slowly. "They've always been." The lights pulsed brighter for a moment, as if acknowledging their presence, and then faded again, leaving the sea dark and silent. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive, full of quiet understanding. Sato finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. "Maybe they're not here to harm us. Maybe they've been watching, waiting, protecting something. Maybe even protecting us." Aiko looked out at the endless water. Then why now? Why wake up? He thought for a moment. Maybe they've seen what we're doing to the ocean. Maybe it's their way of reminding us that we're not alone here, that this world isn't just ours. They stood there for a long time, listening to the gentle sound of waves. Somewhere deep beneath them, something vast and ancient had awakened. Not to destroy, but to remind. Days later, the glowing lights vanished completely. The signal stopped. The sea returned to its usual rhythm. Scientists all over the world tried to explain it. Some called it a natural event. Others refused to talk about it at all. But those who had seen it with their own eyes knew better. Sato never tried to contact the deep again. He locked away his recordings and notes, deciding that some mysteries were meant to be left alone. But every night when he sat by the shore, he still felt the quiet heartbeat of the ocean beneath his feet. Calm, steady, and watchful. He wrote one final entry in his journal. "They are awake now. Not to fight, not to rule, but to watch. We were given a warning and a chance. The ocean is alive and it remembers. The human battleships beneath the waves are not our enemies. They are our mirror, a reminder of what happens when creation forgets respect. We saw them because they wanted us to see, and now it's up to us to listen." He closed the book and set it aside, watching the dark horizon. The night was quiet, but in that silence he felt something gentle. Not fear, not danger, but understanding. The sea had spoken, and for the first time in history, humanity had listened. As the moonlight touched the waves, a faint ripple moved across the surface, as if the ocean itself was smiling. And somewhere far below, in the cold darkness of the deep, a soft pulse answered, slow, steady, and alive.